Hi everyone, this is Luke Johnson, and I'm back with my dear friend Sophie as we discuss the third installment in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. We're going to try to cover chapters 5 through 9 today. I'm feeling good about this because I got a little workout in advance, so I'm feeling centered, feeling very zen. I'm not going to be all paranoid like in the previous episodes, probably. So I'm looking to have a lot of fun talking about this today with Sophie. So, would you like to say anything before we get started, Sophie?
Hello everyone, and if you are watching this video in 1 century from now, you will know how we lived in 2017. We were privileged people who benefited from industrial civilization. I don't know how will be your period of time if the planet will be destroyed by nuclear weapons or I don't know.
Well, it's good to see that Sophie's bringing the paranoia today. One of us has got to do it. Hey, Sophie, I wanted to do something. I didn't tell you this before we were talking off camera, but do you want to tell people about this blog that you started? So if they want to read some of your writing, Sophie is an incredible writer. She writes better in English than most of my English-speaking friends. I know I didn't give you a heads up, but do you want to tell people about it, or do you want to keep it a secret?
It's in French, so I don't know if people who watch this video are able to read French, but if you want, I will give. You can put the link in the description of your video. But I'm not sure how often I will write articles in this blog. I don't know if I will have the energy or the inspiration. The goal I had was to try to share the result of my thoughts with other people, because I think in our current period of history there are some things to be said and to be written, and I think it's important for me to share these things I've been thinking.
I think so. What is the web address?
I will give you it if you want.
Yeah, there's so much to be shared and so much to be written in these days, and maybe I will corral or lasso all the people that work for Noetic into writing some sort of collaborative text one day. But yeah, we can also, when you have it there, we can let people know, or we can just put it in the link.
Okay.
Do you have it?
Yes, I'm just looking at my Facebook page because I have posted the link. So, okay, I'm giving you. So it's in French.
That's okay.
Maybe English-speaking people will enjoy learning French.
Well, in the future, everyone will have merged with machines, so we'll just have a universal translator built into our neural networks. There will be no language barrier.
Yes. Maybe not.
All right. Well, if you don't have the address there, we should get into the lesson.
I posted it in the chat group.
Okay. Let me see.
Chat box.
So if you would like to read Sophie's blog, it's CHEMINDE-DE-LA-VIE-CONSCIENTE.over-blog.com. Okay.
So it's mean the the way of a conscious life.
Excellent. All right, so chapter 5 of Brave New World. It opens with Lenina and Henry, or Lenina, I should say, and Henry taking off in their helicopter. They talk about utility after death and Lenina's class prejudices, and they dance to the Malthusian blues and have sex in the next scene. It was interesting. I had to refresh my memory on exactly who Malthus was in terms of this population control theorist. Sophie may have a little bit more familiarity with him, but he understood essentially he postulated that humanity was going to explode at such a rate that it wouldn't be able to subsist, and he advocated people using moral restraint in regards to sexuality so they didn't propagate the species and eat up all the resources. He knew that there would be serious problems with eugenics and birth control and ways that we would limit human reproduction. So he was all about sexual restraint, and a little bit of research that I was able to do.
Yes, I watched a video of a documentary in France from the TV channel Arte. They put this documentary series online on YouTube. So it's about capitalism, and one of the episodes is about Malthus and Ricardo. So their ideas are really at the origin of modern capitalism, and they influenced a lot the society we live in today.
Yeah. I think there were a lot of people that took up the Malthusian torch. That from the little bit that I was able to read, he wasn't exactly happy with those who ran with his ideas. I'm not an expert on Malthusian thought, but he seemed to be disgruntled with those who were claiming to be apostles. But you should go and research that for yourself, like I said, because I'm no expert.
Ricardo, which is a very someone who influenced a lot of the modern ideas of capitalism, was very much influenced by Malthus. So
I need to look him up. So and thank you for sharing that, Sophie. I did not know that. So Bernard flies to the Fortean community singery, and he participates in a type of religious service complete with rituals. The sign of the T, which is a reference to the Model T automobile that took over America. It also has Blessed Soma and solidarity hymns. You can see how this is supplanting the Christian religion. And under the influence of sacramental soma, it all sort of devolves into this orgy-porgy of sex. Everyone feels complete with the exception of Bernard, and he feels more alone than ever. So this raises a lot of interesting questions that I think Sophie and I are going to talk about here. I mean, we've got all these human interactions of music and the ritual that are synthetic and artificial. And I want to talk about what we're to make of this world state religious ritual where soma is like a religious sacrament. Huxley himself is intimating at the parallels between religious ecstasy and sex, but in Brave New World it's mandated as a way to keep social order. So my first question is, why is this socialistic ceremony hollow for Bernard? And it seems like we can go at this a couple angles. So I'm going to let Sophie do some talking here before I launch into some other questions.
And this ceremony seemed very strange to me, and but it made me think about the concept of ego loss that some people experience either through drugs or through Eastern meditation techniques, and what happens is that they lose their sense of self, and they feel they are a part of the universe, but they lose their sense of individuality. And I think what happens to Bernard is that he has he's very much attached to his ego, I think, and that's why he cannot really enjoy and be part of this ceremony, because he is very much attached to his individuality.
I think that's an absolutely excellent point to bring up, because this world status religious ceremony is all about the fusing of individuals and the loss of the ego, like you talked about. And the thing is, we could switch out different objects of the ceremony. Like we have all this religious ritual today, right? Where people can get swept up on it and feel like they are a constituent element of a larger organism. So if you take out the Fordian Model T cross and the Soma and replace it with the cross of Jesus Christ and the Blessed Sacraments of communion or something like that, you could get a similar sort of effect. And that's why so many people don't feel themselves connected to religion, because they don't feel like they're really individuals in the process. They feel like they've become part of something bigger than themselves, but being part of something bigger than yourself isn't always better. And right?
It's a way to avoid suffering. And I think it's part of, I'm not an expert in Eastern religions and philosophies, but I think it's a part of what they try to do is to get rid of their ego in order to feel peaceful and to avoid suffering.
Right, it's all about the annihilation of the self, right? Like, yes. I mean, I'm not an expert on Eastern religion either, but I think the ultimate state of nirvana is when you kind of have reached nothingness, right? And there is a sense of that. There is hollowness and nothingness when becoming part of a totality. Mm-hmm. Whether it be a Christian totality or a statist totality. And we see, like you were talking about earlier, how Bernard is attached to his ego, and that's why he can't feel like he's necessarily involved in this process. I think a question we need to ask ourselves is Bernard the problem? Right? Is Bernard the problem because is Bernard just infatuated with himself? Are you and I infatuated with ourselves because we are not fitting into this globalist system that we've expressed so much concern for earlier, that you and I lie outside the extremes, and anyone who's really listening to this or reading Brave New World probably feels the same way? Is there something wrong with us?
I think it would be interesting for people to read Kierkegaard, The Sickness Unto Death, because it's really on this particular topic, I think.
Yes. And also, I mean, this is what, I mean, it seems like this is what all the greats, like, they all seem to kind of arrive at the same conclusions. Kierkegaard had a very big problem with not so much a totalitarian secular state where there was all this top-down control, but he had a problem with Christendom as it was going on in Europe at that time. And he wanted people to have a more individual existence before God. And I think you're exactly right that Kierkegaard complements this perfectly. I especially think of certain passages from the Philosophical Fragments and Concluding on Scientific Postscript, and his more acerbic writing towards the end of his life, The Moment, and his railings against the Lutheran Church at that time. Because he was like, you know, everybody considered themselves a Christian because they were participating in the process, but none of them really were working out their salvation with fear and trembling. And that's what the most interesting characters in this book, Brave New World, are doing, is that on their own, they are working out their individuality, whether it be John as he's caught between the worlds of the reservation and the other place, or Bernard as he's caught between classes and his deformity.
They prefer the suffering which is necessary to develop their personality to the peaceful state they would be if they just renounced to this process and just remained a part of the of a group of the group. Yes.
They want to feel the pain.
They want to feel the
Right.
pain because it's what makes them a self.
Right. So, but going back to my question, are we the problem? You know? Like, how can we justify the process of individuation, right? The process of becoming a self and feeling that pain? Because if there is no God, right? If there is no God, becoming a self seems like we're just sort of like a salmon swimming upstream, that we're fighting against the flow of reality, and it's also sort of meaningless. But if there's a God, and God wants to meet us as individuals, and that our actual salvation may hinge on becoming a self, then it seems more meaningful. Or do you think that suffering the pain of becoming a self, whether there's a God or not, still allows for the creation of meaning in our life?
Yes, I think there are people who are not religious, as we both are, who value this process as well. I think it's not necessary to be to be a part of a particular religion, but there would still be people who would be open-minded about the question of spirituality and metaphysics, and there would not be maybe materialist people who only think about the material world. They would be more open to the existence of other level of reality.
Yeah, I mean, and we see this in other existentialist thinkers. We see this in Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir. I'm a little rusty on Sartrean metaphysics, if he ever actually, what conclusions he got to in being and nothingness and whatnot. And if it would be fair to say that thinkers like that were spiritual on some level. I mean, it raises a whole other question about what spirituality really is, and if it's tied to this individualistic striving. But it raises a lot of interesting questions. Would you like to say anything more about this particular chapter before moving on to the next? I think you may have had... I'm seeing here you may have had some notes here about the psychiatrist.
Yes, there is an interview by a psychiatrist, Dabrowski, who talked about the issue he had with the Eastern philosophies and this ego loss process. And if you are interested in his own theory, is really revolutionary and amazing.
What were some of the things that you got from that interview that you shared with me? I haven't had a chance to look at it.
In this interview, he talks about his theory, and he's interviewed by someone, and he talks about his vision about personality development in particular, because it was the main subject of his studies, and so in his opinion, he wanted to get rid of one's individuality is not something good, and he says the words anti-human.
It raises very interesting questions about this strive towards nothingness. I think what we need to do, I'm not gonna make any claims or any things like that, but it makes me want to study Eastern religions more, because I don't know, it would be nice to have someone else's perspective to say, hey, look, I don't know if you're giving us a fair shake about whether or not we're striving for true nothingness, but there can be, because obviously millions, maybe billions of people find something very meaningful about Buddhism and other Eastern religions that do have this annihilation of the self. It'd be interesting what they find meaningful about that process. Have you ever looked into Buddhism or studied it?
Not that much, but I have the idea I have is that maybe in Western countries we are on the opposite side, and maybe we are too self-centered, and maybe not self-centered but we are too much attached to our ego, I think. Yeah. And especially we are very much attached to the character represented in society. And the problem, I think, both vision, either Western and Eastern religion, is that they are not... the problem of people from Eastern and Western cultures is they are not focused, they don't really look for searching for their authentic self.
I think you're right to say that there are extremes on both ends. And what's interesting, to tie it back around to Kierkegaard, ultimately he thinks in this sort of existentialist Christian development that one, in almost sacrificial devotion, loves the neighbor and God in order to have this return on the self. So there is this element of annihilation and restoration there.
It's the concept of the dark night of the soul, is that when a part of you is dying and the inauthentic you is dying, and you are building a more authentic version of yourself.
Yeah, I don't think Kierkegaard would object. I think what he might do is to say that maybe the Western self and its attachment is something caught up in aesthetic and ethical categories, and has become dead to religious and spiritual life in general, and that the Eastern perspective, at least as it is in 2017, might be a progression beyond that. But it's like you said, maybe that dark night of the soul, or the way that he would phrase it would be the night of infinite resignation, and that yet there's one step beyond of the night of faith, and this is the repentance and humility before God, so that we receive our life back again, which you can see worked out in the dynamics between Abraham and Isaac and fear and trembling.
Maybe there is a need of dying in a certain sense, but this is not the last step, and
No.
This is in order to reborn in a better version that we were before.
Yeah, I think you would call this the penultimate step, the Eastern view. I think, but I'm not him, and I can't resurrect him. So let's move on to chapter 6. Just a quick summary. Lenina interrogates Bernard for wanting privacy and questioning societal structure. He's odd. Bernard wants more than mindless sex with Lenina. He wants something meaningful. And Bernard submits his travel plans through the DHC about going to the Savage Reservation. The DHC tells Bernard about the woman that he took there that disappeared. But he quickly shifts attention. The DHC questions Bernard's behavior and threatens him with Icelandic exile. But Bernard and Lenina fly to Santa Fe and meet with the warden of the reservation. There's no escape from the reservation, and people still procreate through natural sex there. While there, Bernard finds out through Watson that the DHC definitely intends to exile him to Iceland, and Bernard's theoretical courage evaporates. So, some things to ponder from chapter 6. There were two things that I wanted to ask, and I don't have the answers to them. Hopefully they'll come out in our conversation. But the first is what is the equivalent of us being exiled to Iceland in our time and place in history? What is Icelandic?
Being unemployed, maybe.
Yeah, let's think about that for a second. All right, so the reason why the DHC wants to exile Bernard is that Bernard is questioning the societal structure, and I think the DHC may have some suspicion that Bernard knows that the DHC has a secret hidden on that reservation. Yeah, I mean, is it just being unemployed?
No, I made this comparison because what happens in society if you when you have to find a job, you have when you work for a company, you have a little bit to play a role. You can really be your authentic self. When you work for a company, you have to a little bit to pretend to accept the values which are from the mainstream, the corporate world, and if you don't agree with the values of the corporate world, then you end up not finding a job or being fired.
Yeah, I mean, it might just be as simple as that. I mean, to be honest, being exiled to Iceland in 2017 wouldn't be that bad. I mean, Bjork is there. It's supposed to be it's actually supposed to be pretty lush. But I'm trying to think if there's anything worse that they can do rather than.
But when you are unemployed, at the same time there is a social repercussion. People tend to be. You tend to be excluded from society, and people look down at you.
Yeah, it goes further than that, right? It's a societal stigma. It's like you're good for nothing, right? If you don't fit into the top-down utilitarian structure of things, then you have no worth. Your worth is completely parasitic upon the pyramid scheme, right? So if you're not participating in that, you might as well be non-existent. Whereas, if we were truly living in a society filled with the Spirit of God, there would be no useless person, right? There would be no exile. Everyone would have some worth, no matter how big or small they are. Yeah. And this raises a lot of interesting questions we have later on about the way that different societies treat one another, and where our own matches up.
You wrote something about this on your commentary about this savage reservation society, and about the usefulness of people, that they, contrary to the Brave New World, the civilized society, they let people become old, and they take care of old people and children.
Yeah, that was the thing. We might as well just go right into it, because on the Indian reservation, Bernard and Lina, they see something without the filter of Soma that takes them to this eternally blissed out place. They see this they see old age in a syncretized ritual of Indian and Christian religion. A man is whipped till he bleeds to make the crops grow, and then they meet John, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed savage that talks like Shakespeare. And we're going to talk a lot about Shakespeare here in the back half of our conversation. But yeah, one of the things that they do, right, is they witness old age in this ritual, and it's something they've never seen before in the Brave New World, right? Like, people are not really kept around, or old age is prolonged through their medical treatments or whatever.
Yes, their body remain young longer, and after a certain time they die, I think. So they never become old.
Don't they live to about 60? Is that right? And
maybe, then they die in Soma overdose.
Yeah, I forget what it is. But I think they're kind of perpetually like 30 years old.
Yes.
And then they just kind of drop dead at 60 or done. I have to refresh my memory on this. Don't take my word for it. But for some reason, there's a trade-off between their genetic and pharmaceutical engineering and their lifespan. The quality of the life, the quality, air quotes, because we've looked at how it's emptier and meaningless, but physically they have a larger peak, but they don't live as long. For whatever reason, it escapes me right at the moment. But let's think about that in terms of our own society, right? Like, you know, and this could get into some really controversial areas because it would require thinking about topics such as euthanasia, prison populations, population control, what we do with hospice homes and medical treatments for those that don't serve any sort of utility. I mean, in some sense, from the American perspective, I think we do.
And
I mean, we're not. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you. Say what you want to say.
No. Maybe you can. What I wanted to say is that these ideas, this debate started with Malthus and Ricardo. In the documentaries I saw, and then there's been social Darwinism idea and the Nazis and eugenics, but the eugenics was there before the Nazis, and the Nazis took this as a part of their ideology, and then now we have transhumanism, and the idea is the problem with transhumanism is that if people prolong their life, if some people do this, not everybody will be able to do this. So they will have to do birth control in order to allow some people to live for a very long time, and maybe it would lead to eugenics.
Yeah, and I think we have to ask ourselves is this already happening? You know, I think people are pretty. I mean, it's interesting because, you know, America has got the we have the death penalty here. I'm not sure if you have the death penalty in France. You probably don't. So we have this is something that we still retain, right? So if someone is not actually seen, if someone's viewed not only as not useful to society.
I can't hear you.
Okay, sorry. Probably just a temporary phase out of my internet. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so we have the death penalty in America. So we not only take people out of the system if they are not active contributors to it, but we actually destroy them, which is a very interesting idea. I'd say in general we're pretty respectful of our elders once they go beyond their prime. I think there is this streak within us to take care of those who are older. Not universally. There's a lot of people who suffer, and there's a lot of people who've devoted their lives to taking care of the elderly. And I know this is really controversial, but to be honest, you know, I'd like to get your perspective about it. We need to talk about controversial things.
Yes, I think it's
the one thing I wanted. I'm sorry to interrupt. The one thing I just want to say is that we have and I know I'm not supposed to talk about this because it's taboo, but we have a lot of abortion in America, and you know, that's something that we need to think about whether or not these are actual beings that are inconvenient to the structure and then are done away with. And I don't know. I'd like to have your perspective on that as someone has an international perspective, as someone who is a woman, and what you think about that. I mean, could we have some of this Brave New World system with what we're doing right now?
I don't think women who get abortion in a country like France are motivated by eugenics ideals. I don't think so. Maybe sometimes they become pregnant by accident, or they are raped, or and they are not prepared to be a mother, and so they decide not to keep their child. But I don't think it is engineered by eugenics ideology. I don't think so. About the problem of old people, and I've heard very influential people who are close to politicians and who have, I won't say names, but people who are very powerful said horrible things about old people, that we should use euthanasia in order
Really?
to kill old people, because they are not useful to society anymore, and they make not profit. They do not contribute to the wealth of the country.
So some people talk like that in Europe?
Yes, there are some people
Really?
who talk like that. And it is the ideas of the Nazis, but if you learn about the Nazis' ideology, it was their idea. They wanted to kill the people, the handicapped people, old people, and also homosexual, and their ideology was to build a race of blonde, strong people. I don't know how you say this in English, but les Aryans in French.
Aryans. The Aryan race.
So it was a eugenics ideology, and they wanted to, and of course the Jews also, they killed the Jews, but they also killed handicapped people and
Romanians too, right?
Yes, and it's funny because we tend to oppose. We don't really necessarily see the link between capitalism and Nazism, but actually there is a close link between the two. As you can find documentaries and articles on the internet, especially the film The Corporation. I haven't seen this movie, but I should. It's about, they talk about how big companies in the United States funded Hitler. They gave him money during World War II. And Ford, I think, Henry Ford, was one of them.
It doesn't surprise me. To be honest, if you really start digging into nearly anything, you'll start making these connections. It really doesn't surprise me. There's something, and after the war, a lot of Nazi scientists were split up, and they went to Russia and America. We actually took in a bunch of Russian scientists that may have been involved in some of these things. I'm not sure. I don't want to, but we had something known as Operation Paperclip, where we gave new identities to a bunch of these Nazi scientists, and they became Americans. So.
And maybe it would be interesting to read. I think I also listened to a radio series about Hannah Arendt, and she studied a lot about the Nazis' ideology, and she made comparison with the communist regimes as well. And I think her thoughts are interesting to learn while reading this Brave New World story. I think there is a connection between the two.
I love Hannah Arendt. and I'm glad you bring her up because you remind me a little bit of her. I feel like you got a little Hannah Arendt in you.
Maybe. I think she thank you so much.
Have you can watch Hannah Arendt. So there's a number of.
But she was very bright. She was one of the brightest philosophers of.
Oh, she's so brilliant. I'd never heard of her before I went to grad school, and then I was introduced to her, and I was just blown away. I was like, how has this thinker been hidden from me? And I'm a big Hannah Arendt. I don't know. A lot of people are like, oh, there are no women who do philosophy or whatever. Not only is Hannah Arendt a woman who does philosophy, she is like one of the best philosophers in like the past 150 years, in my opinion. She is really amazing.
It was fantastic to hear about her life, and she turned to philosophy. She used to like poetry, and she turned to philosophy thanks to Kierkegaard. He was the one who at the beginning she was more interested into poetry, and he was the one who got her interested in philosophy.
He has a way of hooking people, doesn't he? And she was also a journalist, and then like I think she was covering the Nuremberg trials and Eichmann, and I think it really incited this fiery philosophical idea, and she's done so much wonderful stuff. We'll have to talk about her in the future. We've done a little bit. I did an essay of hers with Jordan and CJ that's on the app. The name of it's escaping me. It had something to do with superstition in modern science. But I absolutely love her book, The Life of the Mind, and the Origins of Totalitarianism.
I think it's the origin of totalitarianism, which is the most interesting to learn in the context of Brave New World, I think.
Yeah.
And there is this idea of people, mass society, and people who are not individuals and who are just part of the group and who do not think by themselves.
Yeah, I think that the greatest point about that I remember from the Origins of Totalitarianism was, or maybe I think that was it. But she talked about how the banality of evil, about how if you break down an evil project into small little pieces, and everybody just kind of does their job, right? And we're talking about no one really understands the grand totality of what they're contributing to, which was the Holocaust. Yes. And this Aryan nation idea, and people blinded themselves with their small little tasks that they couldn't see the bigger picture of what was going on.
And maybe something like this is happening right now. And
it is. Trust me, it is.
Yes. And and what's interesting is that there are a few people who will resist to this, who will be more conscious than others, and who will refuse to contribute to this. But there will be a minority there. And this would be the outcast like Bernard and in Brave New World,
Right. That's why I think we're living more in the Brave New World scenario, because you and I can sit here and critique it and be like more aware of it, and no one's going to break into the house and torture us and make us say 2 + 2 = 5, right? That would be kind of more the Orwellian dystopian idea. But you and I can get here and we can actually say these things and no one's going to come after us because like no one's going to take us seriously.
Yes.
They've conditioned everyone else to think that you and I are crazy.
Yes.
So it's like, oh, you listen to Luke and Sophie? They're crazy. Are you crazy? Better go back to work.
Yes. Look at this girl. She's an utopist idealist. She doesn't have her feet on the ground. She's too much. She's a dreamer. and do not listen to what she says. She's not made she's not rational enough for this society.
Yeah. No, if people actually started listening to us, it would start to break down, wouldn't it? So, anyhow, it's really hard. It's really hard to perpetuate a system if you're thinking about books and ideas and dreams and art and stuff like that.
That's why Hitler, one of the first things he did was to burn books and to persecute intellectuals.
Yeah. Especially Jewish intellectuals.
Yes, like Anna Arendt.
Yeah.
Thanks God she escaped this.
Yeah. No. We're very lucky to have her. Okay, so we learn at this Indian ritual about how John's mother came from the other place. And John says his father's name was Tomakin, and that's where the light bulb goes off. Bernard makes the connection of that John is the son of the DHC. Then they meet Linda, who says she was abducted by the Indians. This would be the woman that the DHC lost while he was at the Indian reservation, and she tells him that she gave birth to John. Something I wanted to... we were talking about religious ritual earlier. We were talking about how the status religious ritual that culminates in the orgy-porgy is ultimately empty and meaningless. We talked about how going through the motions of Christian practice in Christendom via the paradigm of Kierkegaard has a certain sort of emptiness and meaninglessness to it. But what did you think about this syncretized Indian Christian religion where the man whips himself to make the crops grow? Do you think there's something meaningful to this, or is it just this religious ecstasy? Is this just another Dionysian frenzy where the people just get together and vent their frustration so that they can go back to being whatever part of the system is that's on the reservation? Or is there something intrinsically meaningful about this ritual that they see on the savage reservation?
My opinion, I'm not sure about this, but I think Aldous Huxley wanted to criticize some masochist attitude that there is in some religious people.
Yeah, the self negation, kind of going back to how like monks and stuff like that used to whip themselves. Mm-hmm.
And I think he does not approve it from what I can understand from his books.
Where do you think that comes from? Where do you think that drive within these rituals for asceticism comes from? The mortification of the body.
I think there is a sense of guilt, and they think that if they punish themselves, it will remove this guilt that they have.
Do you ever feel the need? I mean, you and I are both Christian. Do you ever feel the need to punish yourself? I wonder if I do. I'm just asking the question. I'm just thinking out loud. I mean, maybe I feel like maybe I'm walking around with some guilt, and I continue to punish myself by.
There are many ways to punish ourselves. It's not only physically. Sometimes we put ourselves in difficult situations and unconsciously we do this to punish ourselves. And I think the solution to this is to try to be aware of our faults as much as we can, but to be aware of this and try to improve ourselves. I think it's the most intelligent attitude towards our faults.
Well, here's my question for you: is could we be punishing ourselves but love the punishment?
Some people do. Yes.
Yeah, well, like for instance, people have said to me over the years, "Oh, Luke, come down off your cross," right? You know, like this whole project, like building this teaching platform. You know, a psychoanalyst could look at this, and this is clearly Luke Johnson's manifestation of his guilt by not living up to the societal standards, his parental standards, his educational standards. So he has to go and do in this massive act of self-sacrifice, give his life away to have it crystallized and put up on, on the internet for all to see, so that ultimately he gets some sort of validation, when really he just needed a nice girl.
Yes,
if he just had a nice girl to tell.
I think psychoanalysts can be so close-minded and judgmental, and.
But would they be wrong in my case?
No, I don't think it's true. I think it's a completely close-minded attitude. I can understand why someone would make sacrifice for something which is meaningful to them. And what I feel about you is that you are passionate about what you are doing, and it is meaningful to you. It gives meaning to your life. So it makes you happier than a more traditional life.
It does, but I will say I'm addicted to it, and the only reason why I doubt it is that it sometimes I feel like I've been exiled to Iceland, because you and I, when we talk, like you and I talk the same language, but like when I go out into the wider world, like people think I'm crazy.
I feel the same. I feel this. The same happens to me. Yes.
I mean, people are just like, your kind is not wanted here. I don't understand what you're saying. I don't want to understand what you're saying. Like, please end this conversation. Yeah. Can we talk about sports?
When I am out in the world, in the working world, or with friends who are not close friends, or who cannot really who are close-minded, I cannot really be myself. I have to avoid certain subjects, and
well, see, but I can't, right? Like, I'm like obsessed, and so I can't. So rather than pretend to be something that I'm not, I just don't engage the world like I should, and then I'm exiled.
Yes, but maybe it's the healthier thing, because I think you are more happy this way. That because playing a role and pretend to be someone else is very damaging for someone, and I can say this because I have lived this, and it is very painful to pretend to be someone we are not.
Well, I don't think you've ever pretended to be someone different around me. Of course, I don't know. you're my internet friend, so I have to see what you're like in real life. In real life, you might be just like this crazy party girl.
No, I can tell you. Sometimes when I am with very close friend, I get along very well with. I can have fun with them and forget my seriousness, but most of the time I'm a very eccentric, in the sense that yes, I'm not like most people. I'm not the cool girl.
I'm not cool either.
I like to talk about serious subjects.
Yes.
I don't.
But
and taboo subjects. I love this.
Yeah. Well, we tend to laugh a lot, even when we're talking about the Brave New World. Let's see here. We touched on this topic a little bit earlier about how there's this equalizing, or this we see in this chapter how sterilization becomes a synonym for civilization. And we can see in the Brave New World how if they can disturb the bonds that people have between father, son, mother, daughter, and all these other things, if they can break that all down, if they can break the family unit down, it's easier to control. I don't know if we want to say anything about how the family unit may be collapsing within our own cultures, both in France and in America. Do you?
Yes.
Because I hear this a lot from growing up. I heard this a lot from a lot of evangelical preachers. They'd be like, "Oh, the family unit's breaking down, the sky is falling." But what Huxley seems to be doing here is he seems to be making the case that no, outside of just crazy Christian conservative thought paradigms, there might be a real way to resist totalitarianism by having the family unit intact. And I will say, if you look at it that way, there is a multitude of ways that the family is becoming to matter less and less, at least in America. I don't know if you see some of the same events materializing in France.
What I've seen is that there is less solidarity between generations, and especially what happens. It's very my grandmother. She took care of her own mother because she did not work, so she was able to take care of her mother. And at this period of history, old elder people, they remained in the same house. The different generations lived in the same house, in bigger houses, and they lived together. And then what happened after what the changes that happened is that women started to work, and so they could not take care of their parents. And also, young people tend to go to a bigger city to study and to find a job. So they did not live in the same city as their parents anymore. So the different generations lived in different places, and because we move more than we used to in the beginning of the 20th century, people remained in the same city, and they did not move that much. Now the families are more geographically separated, the different generations, and so there is less solidarity between the parents and their children.
That's a really interesting point to bring up, Sophie, because I think we always think of progress just kind of going at this linear sort of upward tick. But what I hear you saying is that as people have become more cosmopolitan, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I think what you're saying, you're giving a little bit of a critique of feminism.
No, I think there are advantages as well. There are drawbacks and advantages. I think it's a good thing that there is more equality between men and women. But the problem, I think, is because I don't think it should be the woman who take care of her parents. The son could do this as well, Mm-hmm. And the problem is that we work a lot and we don't have time to take care of our parents. And I think what would be more positive is if both the woman and her husband worked less and they could take care of their parents. And
yeah, I think that's a very fair solution. I just wanted to make sure I understood what you were saying.
Yes, I was saying, but there has been positive effects to this transition as well, is that, you know, people had more freedom to do different things that their parents did, and to discover, to meet new people, and to have opportunities that they didn't have in the past. And their life was maybe more diverse and interesting than maybe the previous generation who did the same job generations after generations. So maybe they're having positive things, but one of the negative things is that the generations have been separated.
Yeah. Well, it's important to think about, right? You said like the just to weigh all this, the pros and cons of everything. But I think but it doesn't mean that we can't find solutions, which I think is what you're saying. Okay, here. So moving on to chapter 8. Is there anything else you'd like to say about chapter 7?
I try to remember chapter 7, what it is about.
I think we talked a lot about...
Yes, it's about when Bernard learned about John and how he was the son of Thomakin. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think we talked about all the topics we wanted to talk about.
Okay, let's go on to chapter 8. In chapter 8, we learn how different John's life is from Bernard's. John relates Linda's relationships with men, this hallucinogenic drug that they have called mescal, I believe that's how you pronounce it, and how Indian women beat Linda because she did not know sexual restraint. She comes from the other place, where everybody's just constantly engaging in orgies. She's not familiar with the more traditional and conservative lifestyle on the Indian reservation. What's interesting, and I'm looking forward to doing this part of the book, is that we learn that Linda has taught John to read with an old volume of Shakespeare. And it even gave John the idea to try to kill, is his name, is it Popey? Is that how you say his name? Is that one of Linda's lovers? I think it's Popey or something like that. Yes. But to kill one of Linda's lovers, because John was not allowed to... so it inspires all these sort of dramatic scenarios of revenge and lust and all of that. And what we also learn is that John was not allowed to undergo these Indian initiation rites like the other boys. Instead, he had to go out into the wilderness and invent his own trials to give him a sense of time, death, and God. And there's this moment where John and Bernard realize that they both feel terribly alone, so Bernard invites John and Linda to London, the other place. So there are a lot of things to ponder here, but I wanted to dwell on poetry a little bit. John is between worlds and through anguish and isolation, forcing him to become a true individual, something that Bernard is not quite yet. So John has only really had Shakespeare as his guide, and his spirit would expand through poetry. And the question I had, and a little experiment I want to do, Sophie and I are going to read a piece of poetry, but I had this whole cluster of questions, in regards to poetry and the Hypnopedia and how we learn and how they learn. How is learning poetry the same or different from the sleep learning that goes on in London? How do we feel our soul expand during poetry, and how does that differ from paired associate learning? Does it speak to our spirit? Doesn't poetry capture something ultimately true about lived human experience or metaphysical reality in a way rote memorization or matrix-like upgrades never could? And then I want to, we can think about expanding that to other humanities. But Sophie, would you like to read a poem with me? And then we can answer some of those questions?
Okay.
All right, so Sophie and I think about this. I think about this poem a lot. It's Act 2, Scene 7 from As You Like It by Shakespeare. All the world's a stage. By the way, I think there's a lot of people who've postulated that Shakespeare may have actually been Sir Francis Bacon. It's a theory gaining traction. I think there's a movie coming out soon about this. But we're going to just read this All Worlds a Stage. It's something I had to memorize like in ninth grade. I don't remember it all. But it's my conception of reality is one that is harmonizing with this. So that's why I picked it. So Jacques says this to Duke Senior. And Sophie and I are just going to trade lines. You ready, Sophie?
Yes.
All right. All the world's a stage.
And all the men and women merely players.
They have their exits and their entrances.
And one man in his time plays many parts.
His acts being 7 ages, at first the infant.
Mewling and puking in the nurse's arms.
Then the whining schoolboy with his satchel.
And shining morning face creeping like snail.
Unwillingly to school, and then the lover.
Sighing like furnace with a woeful ballad.
Maid to his mistress's eyebrow, then a soldier.
Full of strange oaths and birdied like the part.
Jealous in honor, sudden and quick in quarrel.
Seeking the bubble reputation.
Even in the cannon's mouth, and then the justice.
In fair round belly with good capon lined.
With eyes severe and beard of formal cut.
Full of wise souls and modern instances.
And so he plays his part. The 6 age shifts.
Into the lean and slippered pantaloon.
With spectacles on nose and pouch on side.
His youthful hose well saved a world too wide.
For his shrunk shank and his big manly voice.
Turning again towards childish treble pipes.
And whistles in his sound. Last scene of all.
That ends this strange eventful history.
Is second childishness and mere oblivion.
Sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything.
All right. Thanks for reading that with me, Sophie. Were you familiar with this piece of poetry?
No, but it makes me think about, we talked about previously during this session about individuation, and I've watched videos about Carl Jung, and he was talking about the how the different part of the psyche, which were the anima, the persona, and the self, the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious, and the whole of all of this formed the self, and what Shakespeare describes is the persona, the mask that the different masks than someone take in his life. So it's his social character.
Yeah. There's so much there. I mean, we could relate this back to Kierkegaard as well as the individual actualizes, right? Where we see this schoolboy who turns into a lover, who turns into a fighter, who turns into a respectable member of society, a judge, and so on and so on. And that these different masks that we wear throughout our life are actually representative of different existential stages, which is very interesting. But that aside, I just want us to think conceptually about poetry for a second. John's spirit on the Indian reservation, because he doesn't have the initiation rites, he only has Shakespeare to learn through. He feels his spirit expand. And I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, even if we don't always understand a piece of poetry or what's going on, what are we learning when we study poetry or when we study philosophy or we study Aldous Huxley? What are we learning that's different from what they're learning in the hatcheries and conditioning centers in Brave New World, where they're getting this paired associate learning between sex and violence and learning these communal phrases such as everyone belongs to everyone else. How is this perhaps a more noble way to learn? What are we really learning? Are we learning something by rote, or are we learning something else? Are we learning how to artistically express ourselves? Are we learning how to showcase our individuality? What's going on here? What are we feeling ourselves ripped out of this system? Like if someone heard us read that poem, did they feel themselves elevated out of this pyramid structure that everyone else is somnambulating through? What's going on when we look at poetry?
Maybe we can invite Baudelaire to this conversation as well.
Yes, please be my guest.
It reminds me of the conversation we had about the poem. The first one we studied together. It was The Confiture of the Artist and the correspondences, and it makes us think about the relationship between poetry and metaphysics.
Yes.
And I think it started in the Greeks, ancient Greece, and Plato and Socrates. They liked poetry a lot, and they gave poetry and music a spiritual meaning.
Yeah, well, it's hard to say. It's hard to say. I wouldn't want to say that universally because, the Greeks definitely elevated poetry quite high. And there are some very poetic moments in Socrates. I'm just thinking about there are certain passages from the Republic where Plato is not a big fan of the arts. But I think what we can say here is there's something about poetry that takes us to a spiritual place, does it not?
Yes, and in the Confiture of the Artist, we can really understand that he's making reference to Platonism and this world of ideas and forms and.
Well, yeah, and we also have to think about how, something that's interesting in Brave New World is that in London, these books are banned, right? They don't want people reading Shakespeare or the Bible because what does it do? Like, aside from teaching people that there is like a more than a material side to life and that there is some sort of spiritual dimension, if you're off reading Shakespeare, what can't you do? If you have a book of Shakespeare in your hand,
you become a passionate individual.
Right, and you're useless. You're no good. You can't run the machines.
And it was the philosophy of Baudelaire. All his life, he wanted to be a useless person.
Yeah.
And it was his rebellion against the Industrial Revolution, I think. His rebellion is that he wanted to be a dandy, a useless person.
Yeah. So like all philosophy and art and poetry makes us totally useless. Not only does it, and then in the process we tempt other people into uselessness.
Yes. And I think there was a debate about, during the presidential election in France, there was one candidate who was in favor of basic income, universal income, and he was. People had criticized this idea because it would make people lazy, and they wouldn't want to work anymore, and it's really interesting when you think about the last episode of Brave New World we did together. We wrote a quote from Nietzsche you know, and how he explained that work can be is the best of police. And the issue is that when people are forced to work, they do not have the psychic and emotional energy to develop their individuality and their critical thinking and independent thinking.
Yeah. Well, they put us all on hamster wheels, and tire us out.
And
right?
Nietzsche was very critical about this.
Yeah.
And Arendt as well. I think it was I read an article. I think it was an analysis of the origin of totalitarianism, and she talked about this role of work in totalitarian regimes. That work can be used to prevent people from exercising political action.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that we have to think about, right, is that, like, if tomorrow we were to give everybody a universal basic income, would they use it to pursue these more spiritual endeavors, And that's the thing, like, I think we would, right? You and I would, but I'm not so sure. Over here in America, people are pretty interested in watching a lot of TV.
Yes, I think that maybe that's right. Maybe some people would just use it to live a hedonist life, and but we have maybe the problem is that we have an issue with our current model of society is that we consume too much resources through our way of life, of producing, consuming. And when we work for a company, we become this producer-consumer individual who participate in this massive exploitation of resources and people, and which is not sustainable for the long term.
Yeah.
And maybe we should learn to appreciate simple things which are not, which do not have, which are not consumption goods, like nature, for instance. And it's they talk about Aldous Huxley talk about this in Brave New World, how people are conditioned to dislike nature because when you like nature, it doesn't.
It's hard to get you to work. Yeah, it's hard to get you to work in a factory when you like nature.
And it's hard to make you work in a factory, and it's hard to make you become a consumer as well, because nature is supposed to be free.
We're getting close to like the hour and a half mark, and so I think we should close with this final question and consider this to be sort of us done with the half of the book. But something I wanted to ask you was this other aspect of poetry, right, is that it causes us to see the world in a really enchanted way. This is something that we've lost as moderns, is that as the secular program has gone forward, the world has become increasingly materialistic to the vast majority of people. It's like you're born, you work, you die, life's unfair, there's nothing magical to it whatsoever. Whereas our predecessors, the world was filled with enchantment. And that's one of the things that poetry brings back. And we see this with John in chapter 9. He wants to make this romantic move on Lenina, right? Like he wants to seduce her. He wants to have her. But it's not just like this animalistic instinct. She glows with significance as the result of all the romantic poetry that he's read. And I think about how the humanities and poetry and things like that can start to give us a sense where people are enchanted beings in a way again, that they are magical, you know, when we can see them in Shakespearean lights, and that's really problematic for this top-down world controller system if we start to see human beings as being magical and enchanted, because then we start to prioritize them over other human beings, and we can't be sublimated into these orgiastic rituals where no one really matters and people can be swapped out. What do you think about the role of poetry in getting us to see the significance of people?
What you just said made me think about the how do you say this in English? The musical Starmania, which was a French musical comedy at first, and then I think it was translated. Some of the songs were translated in English. One of them, maybe you know it. The word is stone, I think. And this musical comedy, it really talks about our current period of history, and there are characters who are very desperate because they are sensitive people and artists, and they feel like aliens in this materialistic world. And it's the Starmania comedy. And it was, or maybe I can give you more information about this, but the lyrics are really good, and it talks about this particular subject, and there are characters who really feel bad and hopeless in a society a world which is cold to them. And so I think it's the song which I think about the most is The World is Stone, but there is another one as well. So The World is Stone, it has been sung by Cyndi Lauper in English. So it's the English version of Le Monde est Stone, which was in French and written by
It's not Time After Time, is it? My music brain is kind of... Let me look it up.
Le Monde est Stone, it was sung by Fabienne Thibault, and it was written by...
I love Cyndi Lauper, by the way. The World is Stone.
Yes, and Starmania, it's a musical comedy and about our current period of about the evolution of society in the 20th century. And it was written by the songs were written by Michel Berger, which is a very famous composer. He died quite young, and Michel Berger and Luc Plamondon, and the lyrics are really great. He was a very extremely talented songwriter, Michel Berger. If you want to search for his songs.
Yeah, I'm gonna listen to it as soon as we finish here. Well, I think I covered everything I need to, and I've got to talk about Pride and Prejudice with Jennifer in about a half hour. So I need to get a little snack and refuel. I thought this was a great session. I thought we covered a lot of ground. Is there anything you'd like to close with?
I would have to say, don't forget to be a child, and don't lose your sense of wonder.
I think that's one of the things I like most about you, Sophie. You've been able to maintain that.
And you too.
And I know. Oftentimes you'll say, sometimes on Facebook you'll call me the big child.
Yes, but because I recognize this in me as well.
Good. All right. Well, I want to thank Sophie for talking about this with me today, and I want to thank you all for listening. You know, if you followed us this far in, you're obviously very invested in the work we're doing, and just, you know, if you want to reach out to me, if you ever want to collaborate in anything, philosophyluke@gmail.com. Download the Noetic app, and check out Sophie's blog. And Sophie, I'll talk to you soon, okay?
Yeah, thank you very much, and I enjoyed this session very much, and I hope everyone who listened to this enjoyed it as much as we did.
Excellent. All right. Take care, Sophie.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.